Hi, I'm Marty Owings. This is Capitol Conversations for Tuesday, April 8th, 2014. We're live here at the Capitol, and as you can hear in the background right now, the House is in session, and Representative Matt Dean is joining us. He's a Republican from District 38B in his fifth term, and at one time the House Minority Leader, I believe, right? Majority. I'm sorry, House Majority Leader. That's right, and lots of experience up here at the Capitol. And Matt was kind enough to stop up and visit us tonight. Thanks for being on the program.
Good to be with you, Marty.
All right, let's get right into it. Let's talk a little bit about the bonding bill, and what in particular, good, bad, indifferent about the bonding bill.
Bonding bill is something that we do every other year, and after the budget year, we do the bonding bill, and it covers all of the construction projects that we pay for with general obligation bonds throughout the state.
So, just I don't mean to interrupt, but let's clarify for viewers that don't understand this. It's not like they're taking money from the $1.2 billion surplus. When we talk about bonds, they're going to borrow money to do this, to bond.
That's correct.
Yeah, because there's some confusion about that with the public. They think that money comes out of the general fund, and it really doesn't, right? We're borrowing to do this.
Right, it's just like a credit card that we have, and we pay that off over about 20 years for each project, and we're going to borrow close to $1 billion very likely in this session, and what that will do is go to things like roads and bridges and the University of Minnesota and lots of other things, including this Capitol,
right,
and projects all around the state.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. A lot of money goes into this, the MnSCU and the University of Minnesota system. About half the money seems to go there. What's your position on that?
MnSCU, which is our college system across the state of Minnesota, and the University of Minnesota campuses have a great deal of need for infrastructure, and not all of that is new building. Much of it is a backlog of maintenance projects for everything from window replacements to new roads to boiler replacements, and a lot of maintenance things that we put off, and just like your house, you have to take care of over time. And when you're as big as the University of Minnesota or our MnSCU campuses, that's a lot of needs that have built up over time. Those buildings are old, and they're behind in many ways in terms of trying to keep up with them. So that's a big piece of that. Also is new buildings that come online for their changing needs, so that our kids stay in Minnesota, get educated here, and hopefully work here be able to get a job that they can find work for their family in.
Well, let me ask you a little bit about that, because I think sources tell me, or at least the students when I see them, that, hey man, we're paying a lot of money in tuition, Marty. It's costing us more than it ever has to go to school. Sometimes out of the reach of when you and I grew up, Matt, we could afford to get a job and go to school and not graduate with all this debt. I think you know all this, but the point is, I don't think a lot of people understand that the state also subsidizes, our public university. No, I wouldn't say a lot, but some people don't understand that. So when you say to a student, oh yeah, and by the way, you're not just paying high tuition, you're also paying taxes, which are going to subsidize this institution. What about that? I mean, that doesn't seem like a free enterprise to me. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, a generation ago, you could go to school and get a part-time job during the year and a full-time job during the summer, and basically cover your nut at a University of Minnesota or even our private colleges. That's not the case anymore when you see tuitions at $30,000 to $50,000 per year for institutions in the state of Minnesota.
Public ones, right? I mean, we're talking about
University of Minnesota might be $20,000 for tuition, room and board. St. Thomas, I don't know what that would be. It might be
I have a daughter go there.
or 40.
Yeah, it's expensive.
And where you're just simply not going to be able to make that. A lot of that was driven by cost inflation in the 90s, where people's homes were going up in value, the stock market was going up, tuition and campuses exploded with new spending, and tuition could go up because people could afford to finance that through the stock market and through the appreciation in their homes. In the last 10 years, that's just not the case. So now that debt has been shifted onto students, So you're graduating from an institution with maybe $100,000 in debt and a job that, if you're lucky enough to find one, you just simply can't afford that debt repayment. So that's really a tough place for students to be, and I think the University of Minnesota is responding in a good way. Our MnSCU institutions are really filling a gap by providing a lower cost alternative for students. Students are also looking at an online perspective, saying that I grew up online. I can learn online better than I can here, and online education has really taken off as a cost-saving tool, but also as a way that these kids have grown up. So kids are adapting with the way they learn, parents are adapting, but also schools have to tighten their belt. A lot of that has to do with unions and trying to keep the tuition down in terms of their labor costs, which is their number one cost. But the bottom line is kids just can't graduate with that amount of debt and be able to pay it off, so they're reacting logically.
I'm just thinking, if I were a business and I don't have the students and I was going to turn into an online model or go to that, I don't have the bricks and mortar anymore that I used to. Why then does tuition then increase, even though maybe those costs, or shouldn't they shrink? I mean, you said tighten their belts, but I'm going to assume you don't need 20,000 acre facility if you're doing online education. But
You know, a lot of that is shared, where you're doing online learning with multiple campuses and distance learning, which is unique. But also, I think the campuses are reacting and do have to react. But they're also in competition with each other. These dorms are pretty sweet nowadays, and they're pretty luxurious compared to when you and I went to college.
oh, sure, yeah, right. Yeah, there might have been some sleeping in the back of cars back then, but I'll just say that. But okay, well, let's turn our attention a little bit to some of the other places of money. That's the majority of it, but you got a lot of money going to like these civic centers in Mankato, Rochester, Mayo Clinic expansion, things like that. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think people can understand, for example, the University of Minnesota, Crookston has a new building that they would like to bring on campus for a student wellness center. The University of Minnesota has a mechanical engineering building. They can understand, well, that needs to be replaced. But then when you look at Rochester Civic Center and St. Cloud Civic Center, and you say, well, that's more economic development for a city. That why is that? Why should residents of Delwood, Minnesota, or White Bear Lake, or North Oaks, where I represent, have to pay for Rochester's and St. Cloud's local economic development? And that's always been a key component.
Sure.
Also, these regional centers are in competition with each other. They'll say, well, we just lost a group of quilters that have always come in, and now they're going to Iowa because we didn't have enough space for them. Or well, in fact, sometimes they're actually competing with each other. So when we help St. Cloud, we might be hurting Rochester by giving them an unfair advantage in some of these trade shows and things that they compete for. So we have to keep that into perspective as well. But our regional centers have done comparatively well with our big downtowns and our suburbs in greater Minnesota. Particularly little tiny towns have been hit hard in the last 5 years after the recession.
Right.
And our regional centers have actually been doing fairly well. So it is a big priority from the majority to fund those this year.
Yeah.
They're in all three, so we think that's likely going to appear in a final bill. But I don't think it's going to be the last chapter in terms of these. There probably always will be some regional competition between these civic centers, and also between little towns that say, hey, if you're going to help out Rochester, why can't you help out Paynesville? Or why can't you help out Thief River Falls, or some of the other areas in the state of Minnesota that are also struggling right now?
Well, when you said that, the thought occurred to me, Representative Dean, that, I guess if I was a city like Rochester, Ardell Breedy down there as the mayor, I'd be asking for some cake too, because what the hell, we're handing it out to guys like Ziggy Wolf like it was growing on trees around here. I don't know what your position is on that, but I guess if I were the mayor of that town, I'd be saying the same thing. We got cash to give, billionaires, for their civic centers or their playgrounds.
Well,
What the heck?
the People's Stadium as it's called. It is about the biggest boondoggle that we have seen come down the pike since we got here.
You said it, and I think everybody sort of agrees with that who's had to pay for it, but, you know.
Well, when the whole financing of this thing was predicated on, you know, handing out iPads to VFWs and hoping that, distributing these things and hoping people would somehow gamble on them and the money would flow in, was ridiculous. And
Well, even the governor admitted that was didn't go well.
Well, I suggested to the governor that at the time that we might finance that the way we finance all of the other bills, the construction projects that we've done for the last 100 years around here were in the bonding bill, and that we pay for that way. And he referred to that as a harebrained scheme. So I don't think that his plan worked out so well, but I'm not going to call it harebrained.
Well, the governor might dispute that it was his exact plan, but I'm sure there were others involved. But
that was his choice.
Yeah, but sort of the arm twisting that went on during that debate and subsequent,
And smokers, ironically, ended up paying for the People's Stadium. And I don't know about you, but I'm not going to be able to afford to take my 3 kids to a football game with my wife. And I don't know who is going to be able to afford to do that in the new People's Stadium.
Well, don't you have to buy a People's seat license to have a seat in the People's seat?
Over $2,000 for a seat license, and
just for the right to have a season ticket or
exactly.
talk about it.
And a family of 4, it's going to be $250 to $1,600 per game in order to go. So I don't see that as a real choice for most Minnesotans that are having a hard time right now. But having said that, people like to watch it on television, and they love their Vikings.
Yeah, okay.
I just wish we could have come up with a better deal for the state relative to the other states and cities that haven't gotten taken to the cleaners like we did.
I mean, when you talk about investment in public infrastructure, Representative Dean, people think of roads, bridges, you know, parks, if parks, you know. Hey, we love our state parks. We use those a lot. And guess what? They're within reach of the average Joe still, thank goodness. But when we talk about building stadiums and things like that, that isn't in the general public interest. It seems like it's in the, no offense to the rich guys and corporations that can afford the seats, but that doesn't seem to be in the public interest. I mean, we've argued this, I know, and you've heard all of it, but
sure.
I heard some of your remarks about it, and I thought, I thought it drove the point home. I mean, we've got an issue here. We're going to spend money on this. It's not just money, Representative Dean, that's going to subsidize this. It seems like it's money that could be spent better elsewhere as well.
Absolutely.
So it's an opportunity cost, it sounds like.
Absolutely, and it's money that just got taken off the table. So if we were Houston and we were able to argue or negotiate for a better deal, that's several $100 million that could go to, let's say, Como Park. Now, I like Como Park. I grew up around Como Park.
Who doesn't love Como Park, right?
I asked my wife to marry her at Como Park.
Did you really?
I love
what a
Sparky
great
the
place.
Seal. You don't have to pay any money. I can bring my kids for free.
Right.
That's a statewide investment that we can all relate to, and that I think we can say, yeah, I can understand spending money there. When you look at a large amount of money going to a corporate interest, and in this particular instance, a wealthy NFL owner, people have a very tough time with that. But that's a very, very thorny issue, and it's one that I think we didn't do a very good job negotiating a good deal. I think in the end, we probably would have had to pay more than a lot of people wanted to. But I think if you look at other states, they didn't get taken to the cleaners like we did. And I think that we needed to do a better job of looking out for the taxpayers' interests and negotiating that. The people that I represent couldn't hire lobbyists to get in there and fight for their best interests. They wanted to keep the team, they wanted a reasonable stadium that wasn't over the top, and they wanted a decent deal where we didn't get taken to the cleaners. They didn't want to be a chump. Our job as legislators is to be a lobbyist for our folks at home, because they can't pay for all of the expensive lobbyists that the Vikings did, and I think that was really an unfortunate thing. and that I think the governor needed to show more leadership on that. It's one that I fault him for publicly, and we'll probably disagree on that, but I just think that's a leadership thing that the governor needed to step forward and do that didn't get done.
Understood. Let's talk a little bit about the Senate office building. There's been some ideas floated to rearrange the Capitol, and maybe that would be a more economic solution to sort of the space issue, because as you and I know, we're being around down here. If you're on the Senate side, not the House guys, you guys are in the state office building, but the senators are, it's kind of haphazard the way they're organized. Some senators, the minority's going to be over in the state office building, majority's here, but the offices are, they are kind of haphazard laid out, at least for the size of the Senate in the state.
Yeah, we have 67 senators, and the majority party has offices in the Capitol. The minority party has offices in the state office building. And we are currently restoring the Capitol building for about $250 million. And as part of that, they said, well, maybe what we should do is solve some of the space issues with the Senate.
Yeah.
Now, that seems like it might make sense, but right in the last days of the last session, a new building popped up for $90 million and only housed half of the senators.
That wasn't even a full solution, yeah.
44 of them are over there. But now they said, well, we'll just add more offices, so it's 67 offices for $90 million. And how are we going to save costs? Well, we'll cut off the public parking ramp, of all things.
I read that, yeah.
So now we have 67 offices across the street with no public parking in a big, beautiful building, and we're doing $250 million to fix up this building, and we still have another building. So people at home are just scratching their heads, and whenever I hear from my dad up in Walker, Minnesota, he lives in a cabin that he built and retired in up there, and he says, what in the heck are you guys doing down there with that Senate office building? So I know that by the time it gets up to Walker, Minnesota at his cronies at the gun club, that we must have really screwed up down here. And people are really hot and bothered about that because it doesn't make sense to the average guy. You shouldn't need a $90 million office space when we've got buildings that are partially empty on the Capitol campus, and we've got a downtown that's about a third empty in office space. We should be able to figure this out without spending another $100 million.
Well, the way you guys are laid out, and no argument on that, but the way you guys are laid out in the state office building, if you, Matt Dean, want to go talk to Representative Ryan Winkler, you just go down a few floors or up or whatever. You guys can hit each other up there. It might be an inconvenience to have to go downtown. I understand that. I can appreciate that. And believe me, I'd rather have you guys closer in proximity because you guys tend to then have to pass each other in the halls and talk to each other, even by accident. And that's a good thing for, I think, Minnesotans. But when you think about being spread out like that, how would that work? I mean, in practical sense.
Well, in practical sense, it works. It works currently. It can work better. We have a lot of staff and other things that we currently have within the buildings that are not related to the House or Senate, so those could be displaced and we could have all of the senators and all of the House members together. We're also not here full-time. We're supposed to be a part-time legislature, so when we're going to have over 121 offices for 67 senators. So everybody's going to have almost 2 offices per senator. For a part-time job, that's probably more than you need. For the average person is probably thinking about that. These are pretty nice offices. So I think we can probably work within the space that we have and make it functional. But also we need to also find ways that we can work better together. And I think right now we have Republicans and Democrats are separated by floors. I don't see any reason to have, if my office was next door to Ryan Winkler's, we might actually come up with a good idea once in a while and maybe go to lunch every once in a while. And that might be a good thing for the work that's getting done around here.
Very good. Let's touch on one final subject here while we're at it. Minimum wage. Some news today from the Capitol. It sounds like minimum wage is going to go forward. Let's talk about a few of the details first. Share with the viewer the details on that and what your thoughts are.
Well, there is supposedly no connection between the minimum wage bill and the Senate office building. However, they were both sort of hatched on the same weekend. So a lot of people are wondering about whether or not those two things are actually connected. Supposedly that is just a coincidence, so I guess I'll take it at face value. But I think that when you talk about imposing that kind of a cost on small businesses across the state of Minnesota,
Well, let's be specific. What's the cost?
it's going
In
to
terms of $1 an hour, what are we talking about?
Sure, it's over $2 an hour increase, and it's indexed for inflation. Now, there's also a training wage that they've also added on the front end of that. But when we're looking at like a practical example is that I like to use is Beartown in White Bear, Minnesota,
No,
where they have. It's not where the wealthy people in my district go. It's where I go. You can get a $2.99 hamburger. And when you're trying
you don't go to Cup and Cone? What's the deal?
for dessert, yeah,
Okay,
you can
all
get a
right,
very
fair
good
enough.
dessert at Cup and Cone after going to Beartown. But they have 2-for-1 drink offers and $2.99 hamburgers.
Yeah.
You're not, and you think every single employee that's working as a server at that place is going to have imposed on them over $2 times $2,000 a year, $4,000 for every person walking around. You got to make that up with hamburgers, less $3 hamburgers. You're not going to be able to do that if you're that business owner. That is the direct consequence.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about a training wage or a living wage for people, people say, well, if you're making minimum wage, you should be able to be off of all the public programs. Well, we have public programs in the state of Minnesota. If in the case of health care, that you can be almost 300% of the federal poverty guideline and be covered. So you would have to make over $25 an hour working full time, and you could still be covered within the state health care subsidy program. So when we talk about having to graduate away from public subsidies by somehow giving a higher minimum wage that nobody is going to have to rely on public subsidies anymore is a farce.
I'm going to guess, Representative Dean, that the devil's in the details on that health care thing. Probably there's some threshold there, but I don't want to make assumptions. But let's go to this point you made. All right. We're subsidizing billionaires in their stadiums. Don't you think people would pay $4.99 for that hamburger if they knew that their neighbors, friends, kids were able to get a livable wage? What are your thoughts about that? Friends, neighbors, you and I. I'll pay an extra $1 once in a while for a hamburger if I know that single mom is going to be able to, put gas in her car and keep her job.
Well, it's $4,000 per employee for the small business, and they're competing with each other, and they're also competing against big chains, the McDonald's across the street, for example. You might just decide that you don't like the neighborhood atmosphere, and you're just grab a Big Mac and eat it at home on the way home.
Maybe I'm going to make a value decision versus a...
Right.
Yeah.
And they're in tough competition. The small business owners in the state of Minnesota are hanging on by their very fingernails. And the people down here do not get that. They do not understand how tough it is to try to make it in small business in Minnesota with our tax and regulatory system that we currently have. And every day we seem to be making it tougher for small businesses and families to survive. We might think it's a good idea or it's a noble thing. But for them, it's a life and death decision about being able to either keep the doors open or tell somebody they no longer have a job. It was best described to me by a business owner who said, actually, you think you're going to be doing such a noble thing and a great thing by increasing the minimum wage. My servers are the only ones that make minimum wage. Everybody else makes above minimum wage. What you're actually going to do is you're going to fire one or two of them, and you're going to have a pay cut to my busboys and my dishwashers because they currently make over minimum wage. But they're going to eat the cost of this, not the tipped employees. And and also I heard the same thing from the nursing homes. It says, you've got people working 15, 17 years that might make $11, $12 an hour. And if we bring in the minimum wage index to just bumping up right underneath them, they're saying, well, why did I, what am I going to do? Why have I put in all this time? They can't turn around and raise their prices because those are fixed by the government. So what are they going to do? So there's really a lot of unintended consequences by noble thoughts that we might have around here, but they have real impacts on small businesses and families.
Okay, one question I have for you on a more philosophical level is that, whenever I sit with Republicans, not whenever, but from time to time, we have this conversation, and it seems like it's only, what are the positives in it? Let's talk a little bit about what the positives in a federal or a state minimum wage increase would be. Because I don't want to dwell on the fear part,
Sure.
Hey, let's be scared if this happens, because we go through a lot of changes around here we're scared of. At the end of the day, are there any positives for it? Would it help at all, in your opinion?
Sure, it'll help some people
Okay.
and some families, but I gotta.
You think the damage will be greater than the good it will do in the
I
end?
think it will, but I have a kid who's just turned 16, and I would very much like him to get a job. He doesn't need to he's not supporting a family of four.
Right.
He needs to go someplace where he learns to show up on time, to put up with people he'd rather not put up with, and to put his head down and get his work done for a day and go home. That's good skills that he needs to pick up, but he doesn't need to support a family, and I don't think he should necessarily think that he has the same obligation in terms of earning that a dad might or a mom might or somebody who's really struggling.
Fair enough. And you got some big papers over here. Did you bring those up were you going to show us some stuff? Or
I'm going to pass those out on the
yeah?
floor in a little bit.
Can you hold them up for people just so they can see the volume of paper we've got here, Matt? So what's the deal?
Going through a lot of paper on the floor. These are amendments.
They're amendments?
These are information regarding amendments that are coming up, but we've processing a lot of bills in a short period of time, so we're going to be going through some sawdust around here.
Yeah, we got to wrap up here, but let me ask you a question. How's the team doing? You got the Republicans on one side and the Democrats on the other, and you guys are in the minority, and it's hard to be in the minority. Especially you came from, you've been in both since your time up here, but a lot of the times you had the governor. For 8 years you had Governor Tim Pawlenty, and you knew that even if the legislature was split, it was only going to go so far.
Right.
How's it different now for you?
We don't have a goalie. Governor Pawlenty was our goalie. Could, in the end, stop.
Well, Marty Dane says he's a goalie. He's an old goalie, right?
He is a goalie. He's an actual hockey goalie. But I think that when you see one party in control, the Democrats in control right now, we haven't had this since the 80s. And I like to say that Democrat control is kind of like the McRib. It's for a limited time only, because once you've had it, you realize why it's for a limited time only. People, I think, are going to be a little bit tired of this in a very short period of time with the tax increases and the silly spending. So I don't worry about that. I think we're going to have some balanced government coming back soon. But you know what? The bottom line is people expect us to work together and get stuff done. They don't expect us to agree with each other on everything. That's what I think is missing. Right now, we need people to say, okay, you don't like my idea, I don't like your idea, but we work for these people, and that's got to come number one. That's the difference. That's what's missing right now, and I think that's what people are asking us to do.
Very good. Well, with that, I think we'll wrap up. I appreciate you taking the time while you're in session here to stop on by. Matt Dean, it's always good to talk to you.
Thanks. Good to see you.
You too.
Take care, Murray.
All right, that's it for tonight from the Capitol. We've been live with Representative Matt Dean here on Capitol Conversations. For the crew, I'm Marty Owings. We'll see you next week.